cheat too much and put Close to the Edge in the montage because I did want to have it bumper this segment because it is probably the longest piece and also the most representative. So I kind of wanted you to hear this right before you hear my voice. So we are going to
put two different sections of Close to the Edge. You wouldn't know.
Or 12.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Well, let me kind of cover a little bit of this, and maybe that'll help explain a little bit. So, you know me, I do the bios that are a little bit the least long, because I like to chatter and add fold-in details along the way. So let me give some of the basics right now.
You need some numbers here, John.
Oh, yes, I'd love to hear the numbers, Matt.
Number 24 in the 1970s on Best Ever Albums, number 4 in 1972. John, you're going to be in 1973 soon, before we know it.
Absolutely.
Hey.
He's on the zeitgeist.
Yeah. On Best Ever Albums, overall rank 96, cracking the top 100. And in Rolling Stone's list, not so high, 445 in the top 500 in Rolling Stone. Okay.
Well, this is Yes's 5th album. We actually covered their 4th album in the couple episodes back with Fragile. And this one was released on September 13th, 1972, as they mentioned. So not only is it 1972, but we're more than halfway through 1972. So we are working our way toward not the mid-70s, but definitely out of the early 70s at that point. This is also the last album to feature the classic lineup of the band because the drummer, Bill Buford, leaves after this to join King Crimson, actually. One of the main reasons he does is because, boy, the recording of this album was something else. Because there are 3 perfectionists in the band, actually, and then poor Rick Wakeman and Bill Buford are often described in all of the articles I've read as basically just sitting back, with Bill Buford becoming more and more exacerbated. Excuse me. Frustrated would maybe be another term that we could use. So sorry, I can't speak these days. But he was just getting more and more frustrated because it was taking forever. There's one story that I'm going to read to you in a little bit. I'm going to pull it up, but that just shows exactly how exacting the recording process was. But he hated every part of producing this. And basically by the end, he's like, I can't do this anymore. And he had to leave. Rick Wakeman was also described as very disillusioned during the recovering here, although he was more dazed because he was given creative freedom. That was one thing that Yes was good at. They gave all of their band members creative freedom. But he was also often described as playing adjacent to the vision that the rest of the band had that wasn't always clear to everything else. So Bill Bruford's out at the end of this album. Rick Wakeman's there for a little bit longer, but the band was kind of in a state of tumult at this point. As a reminder, the rest of the band, because I keep mentioning it, is lead vocalist John Anderson, bassist and backing vocalist Chris Squire, guitarist Steve Howe, and then the 2 members I mentioned before, keyboardist Rick Wakeman and drummer Bill Bruford. And so to give you, before I get into some of the context, to give you an idea of what you're dealing with here in terms of what it was like to make this album, let me read you a little bit of a description of kind of how the recording process was described. So let me read this to you. Bruford found Close to the Edge particularly difficult to write and record with the rest of the band, calling the process torturous and like climbing Mount Everest. He became frustrated with the band's happy, diatonic music and favored more jazz-oriented and improvisational compositions. This became an issue with the group's way of composing and recording, as each section of a track was played through and discussed section by section. Bruford said every instrument was up for democratic election, and everybody had to run an election campaign on every issue. It was horrible, it was incredibly unpleasant, and unbelievably hard work. Squire, in particular, became a growing source of discontent for Bruford, citing his frequent lateness for rehearsals and his way of working. In one instance, Bruford fell asleep on a sofa in the studio control room while Squire was poring over a couple of knobs on the mixing desk to determine how much equalization should be applied to his bass tracks, only to wake up several hours later, finding Squire in the same place, still considering the relative position of the 2 knobs. So I felt like that did a good job of. I actually saw an interview where this story was told, basically in these words, and sort of you can still tell I just was done. Another thing that made me laugh about this was that the band would sometimes record arrangements that were so complex that they couldn't remember how to play them the next day, so they actually started to have to record them so that they could remember kind of what was going on, but whole parts of the tracks were lost, and they were also recording these things in fragments and then trying to piece them together. So I guess what I'm trying to say is we're at peak prog rock right here, guys.
Yeah,
because
we sure are.
We are getting into like what, and we talked about Yes Fragile having elements of prog rock, but just being prog light. And I think I can pretty comfortably say that this is the first. You know, we've had the Moody Blues, we've had King Crimson, which certainly were prog rock albums, right? And then we've got, that earlier Yes album, but this is the first sort of sprawling prog rock album that we have.
Yeah, you wouldn't put this in the same category with Jethro Tull, right? That was also under the prog rock moniker.
Yes,
but you've kind of leveled up on prog rock on this.
You've leveled up for sure. Yep.
Multiple times.
A couple other things that I thought were very, very funny about this album is that the first track on this album, Close to the Edge, as I'm reading these things, you're laughing because they became sort of the elements of it. So Close to the Edge was 18 minutes, and it was inspired by Anderson in his hotel room during the Fragile tour. He was actually reading The Lord of the Rings while listening to Symphony No. 6 and 7 by Jean Sibelius. And then he decided to put those pieces together, but also based the theme and the lyrical content on the novel Siddhartha, another famous novel by novelist Hermann Hesse. So all of those things came together for sort of that, fantasy elements of what the feel was supposed to be. Another thing that was there. I'm sure you guys noticed, but the opening of that track also had the nature sounds, and flowing water, bird chirps, stuff like that. It was basically a tape loop. At the end of it, it measured 40 feet in length, and it actually took 2 days to record. And so that was just for the beginning of that track.
Just birds.
There's other standards, like the band toured with a fusion orchestra along the way. Just all the things that we know and love about peak prog rock, right? So I just sort of and after this album, without Bruford, they actually hired the drummer from the Plastic Ono band and toured this for pretty much 2 years. And one of the interesting things about Yes is that after this album and after that tour, which was incredibly commercially successful, as was this album, and critically well regarded, Yes was considered to hit a slump. And they released that live album, Yes Songs, which was polarizing. But then it was kind of like they were thought to have lost their fastball until they reinvented themselves in the late 70s and certainly the 80s as a more mainstream radio-friendly band for a period of time before that went out the window too, and then there were a bunch of lawsuits. So this sort of represents the zenith of Yes in terms of the Yes that you think of as peak Yes. Lineup, sales, artistic, sort of the critical acclaim, artistic relevance, things along those lines. So I've sort of set the table right there. Matt, initial thoughts. What do you think?
I think I need some more. Wait. Go ahead, Josh.
I was gonna say, John, do you have a sense of how long in total it took to record the album? I don't know if you. I don't think you said that.
I believe if I remember correctly, they began recording this in February 1972, and it was released in September 1972.
Yeah, it says February through June is the recording.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah. Okay, so good. My memory is correct there then. So but the process itself, I think it was, in terms of total time, it might not have seemed as long, but in terms of what each of those days looked like, boy, I think it was, each day was a grind.
Yeah. Well, it's still like half a year.
Yeah,
that's true.
So, and my initial take is I think I need more time with this album. There is a lot going on here. And
is there ever?
And I'm mixed on it. There's parts of it that I really like. There's parts of it that I'm going, what the heck is going on? I don't think it starts off well. I think the way that those first 5 minutes or whatever of Close to the Edge is just, that's probably one of those parts, John, where I just imagine the band's like, what were we playing again? What was that? Because it's just not, like, if that's written down, that's amazing, because it just seems like a bunch of frantic, wizardry on whatever instrument that the guy's playing. But there's the way that it flows. Like I really like the I get up, I get down part. That kind of that starts to kind of midway through the song, it slows down and it gets a little bit more structured, a little bit more melodic, and it builds. I really like Anderson's voice when he's doing that. It's got a little echoey thing, and then
we should mention.
Yeah,
that's one of the two things that's a repeat, along with Close to the Edge, Round by the Corner, that comes up consistently as a hallmark of those songs.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
And then the organ comes in, like the church organ, the very heavy. I'm like, that's cool. Like I didn't expect that to come.
It's like Phantom of the Opera or something.
Yeah, and it's pretty bad. I mean, he doesn't do it for too terribly long, but it
was actually written as a guitar solo. Believe it or not, by Hal.
Yeah.
Yep. And then they thought it sounded better on the organ, so they just went with that.
That's like the opposite of a guitar sound, So there's parts of it that I really liked, but yeah, it took a little bit for me to get into that. The second side, and you and I think I liked probably the best overall on here. I think that's I like the guitar sound. I don't know if it's a 12-string guitar kind of a acoustic sound, but whatever tone that they're getting there, their production, whatever they're doing, I really like. But this is a hard album for me just to be like. I could see myself upon multiple listens going, this album's freaking awesome. And I could see myself after many more listens going, okay, it's just okay. I don't hate it. I certainly don't dislike it or hate it. I appreciate what they're doing. It is a lot. And I think, John, the last time we talked about Yes, you were talking about, I don't know so much if it was them or prog rock, but about it's very math. It's like it's very, this analytical, mathematical way of producing music. And I think that that's a really good description of what's happening here. And it's certainly not for everybody. These guys are they're going out of their way to be different. They're going out, like, how can we just, confuse people and just do weird stuff, but also at the same time, grounded in something that sounds kind of cool at times, that sounds very, that's either melodic or that's got a good bass groove. I didn't find the cool bass grooves as much in this record as I did with Fragile. I think that was one of my favorite parts of that was some of Squire's bass parts. And I just like them better on that record. But I'm mixed on this. It's cool. I like it. It's unique. It's different. But it's a rather intense listen, and I don't know how often I would go back to this. It's very interesting. I'm a little I'll leave it at that for right now.
You're at not yes.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Where's it compared to Genesis for you?
Not even close.
Yeah.
That's why I'm interested to cover Genesis because, Genesis is also a band that I've known for many, many years, and I've listened to that plenty of times. So I'm interested to hear other people's perspectives of listening to those albums for a week. I think Genesis is much. I just think they're much better. The songs are the structure of the songs, the way they flow, the parts are much cooler, much more melodic, much more interesting, and not as confusing for me.
Yeah.
I'll be interested to hear your take on that, Josh.
Yeah,
I know
me too.
Matt has a relationship with Genesis, so I'll be, as you with not having a relationship, I'll be interested to see.
It'll be coming in fresh. This album is intense. That's one way to describe it. I have to respect Yes because no other band sounds like them, and they pack so much in. It's like everything in the kitchen sink into 3 tracks. And granted, some of these tracks are almost 20 minutes long, but they really try and push it to the limit and put as many instruments in as you can. They are seemingly pioneers of having movements in their songs, four? It's 4 different parts in the first Close to the Edge track. I was trying
and the second one. The second one's got 4 parts too.
Yeah, but they're not listed, right?
They are in Wikipedia.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
I didn't see that.
They are. Yeah. The first 2 tracks do have 4 chapters apiece, which I did not mention, but yes, they do.
Chapters. Do you guys? I tried to play the game of where the chapters were, when the new chapter started, and I couldn't figure that out either.
Close to the Edge was pretty easy to figure out, I thought, because there were hallmarks of both.
Yeah, but they're not even chapters. Also, I don't think.
No. Yeah. And you and I, even in terms of how they described recording it, I don't think was as coherent. Yeah. Well, so that's, I think the chapters are harder to figure out, but Close to the Edge has a little bit more, I think, line of demarcations for me.
Yeah, this album is very interesting. It's a little schizophrenic for me. I get little, like Matt says, you hear little things you like or like really interesting things, and then it transitions into something completely different, seemingly at a right angle. I heard The Police a little bit on the first track for some reason. I think with the harmonizing of the singing, you get some crazy synth on this album. I think that's kind of the first, if one of the earlier incantations of what 80s synth would become.
Well, it's got to be the Mellotron, right? I mean, I would assume
maybe
that's
the Mellotron. Yeah. You get a lot of spacey sounding stuff too, in Close to the Edge, and vocals and vibes, and then you get that crazy Phantom of the Opera.
To give you an idea, just on this track alone, Rick Wakeman plays the Hammond organ, the Mini Moog, the Mellotron, the grand piano, the harpsichord, the pipe organ, and the RMI 368 Electra piano.
Well, there you go.
All of those are what Rick Wakeman is playing at different times. Yeah.
So it's like a drinking game. You have to try and find the instruments and then match them up. So that's kind of the cool part about listening to this, is hearing all the different stuff that's going on. And if you're into variety, you're certainly going to get that on here. And You and I has some crazy synth as well, or Mellotron, which I enjoyed. I think my favorite track was the last track, Siberian Cantrue. There's some crazy guitar in the beginning that I really liked, and then it transitions into Indian sounding and classical organ, and it just keeps going into evolving.
Instrument check on Rick Wakeman pared it down a little bit on the second track. He only played the Mellotron, the Mini Moog, and the Hammond organ. However, Steve Howe upped his game with playing the acoustic, electric, and pedal steel guitar, while there also was bass guitar as well. So,
jeez. So I guess it's props to them too that they can play all those different instruments and do it. So, but I guess the bottom line is it's an experience. Yes, it's an experience. Listening to the album is an experience. You have to kind of focus, or you'll get lost in all that's going on. But it's a fun journey. I mean, this is not the type of album that I would listen to on the regular, right? It's not something that I would just put on. I wouldn't even put it on shuffle. You have to kind of, I think, almost seek it out or hear about it from somebody that you hear about from someone else, or it's buried in a hole somewhere and you have to go find it, and with a treasure map, and then
I think drugs might help it for a lot of people too. You know?
That's probably true. That's that changes the experience too. But yeah, I like it more than Fragile. I think I like it more than Fragile. It's a bit crazier, and there's not really, I mean, I think Fragile's almost kind of more of a traditional album, like John says. You can hear regular songs and choruses and things, and this has none of that. So I feel like I'm just babbling. It's like the album, it's like free association. How many different things can you put in on the podcast to talk about? Yes.
Gotcha. Well, just to be a completist here, so that you can see exactly when those things are, the different parts. Okay, so for Close to the Edge, there's 4 parts. The first part is known as the solid time of change and runs for the first 6 minutes and 4 seconds. There's then the total mass retain, which is 2:25. I Get Up, I Get Down at the 8:29 mark, which goes for 5 minutes and 43 seconds. And the final part is Seasons of Man at the 14:12 mark and goes 4 minutes and 30 seconds.
Okay.
And You and I, the 4 parts, is Chord of Life starts the track until the 3 minutes and 47 second mark, followed by Eclipse, which runs for 2 minutes and 29 seconds, running to 6 minutes and 16, where the preacher, the teacher, comes in for 3 minutes and 10 seconds. And then the Apocalypse comes in at 9:26 and runs for a relatively brief 42 seconds. So if you're looking for timestamps, there's that. Couple things about this album in my take. Matt mentioned... So I don't like this album as much as I liked Fragile, because I understood the framework of Fragile a little bit better, whereas this seemed a little bit more scattershot to me. And I felt I needed more of a treasure map for this album, because it was so scattered and because it wasn't there and it felt pieced together. I would have needed to connect with the album emotionally. And one thing that prog rock is always a challenge with me on is I struggle to connect emotionally with prog rock.
Yeah.
As Matt has mentioned, I felt this was a very clinical album. I did not dislike it. I found it interesting, but it was a cognitive exercise for me. I was not feeling an emotional connection.
Well, I don't think that's an unusual response. How could you have an emotional response?
I think if you see Yes live, because I've seen so many live Yes performances from having a father who loves Yes and just wanted to show me Yes over and over again, I could definitely see how you get it sitting in the crowd listening to Yes. You know what I mean? Because I think that's it. And I think in many ways you have to watch Yes live to truly understand what they are, which is a little bit of a prog rock staple. But I think that was my takeaway on this is this album sounded exactly in the form of sonically what was going on with the band in terms of the construction of it. It felt like a lot of people were contributing stuff, and sometimes it congealed into something that sounded really good. Sometimes, though, and more often, I felt it sounded like everybody sort of throwing in their pieces, and thus it was, as you mentioned, schizophrenic in the sense that some pieces really fit well, and then other pieces didn't feel like they fit as well in the composition. Mm-hmm. And what I liked about Fragile better was they separated out the pieces that were each band member's piece, so you kind of knew what they sounded like, if you remember. And then you got the full group compositions, which, to me, roundabout is what happens when they all congeal perfectly. And you're getting all of it, and they're all taking their turn, sort of like a good jazz band, all doing their solos or all coming to the forefront, and it's coming together. Here, I felt that it was harder to put the pieces together, and because of that, it made it harder to connect overall to the album. I also thought the ponderous 18-40-minute length was not a plus for some of these songs. I think Fragile actually benefited from a couple longer tracks, but also piecing out shorter tracks. Here, I wouldn't say it ran together like the Allman Brothers did for me at times. It certainly didn't run together, but it became impenetrable after a while, and that made it hard to get a total view of it. So I would say thumbs in the middle for an ambitious musical listener, but if you are someone that likes traditional structures and this is going to be a very, very difficult album for you, and it might be a stay away from it. But if you consider yourself to be a completist or an ambitious listener, or someone who does not mind length or differences of sonic palette in their albums, I think there's a lot you can take from this. And that's, I think, my overview.
Do you think that part of the appeal to an album like this, or even a band like this, is trying to figure out the album?
Yes, I think that's a big part of the appeal of prog rock in general. Yeah.
Well, then if go ahead.
I was just gonna say I don't have that desire when listening.
I think
to music.
It's also it's people who have musical backgrounds or an appreciation for musical I think that there's an overlap between things like classical music and jazz, and people that love music theory as well. Because those people, it isn't a chore to do that. I think it's part of the appeal of these bands is they all can really play, and they're all doing all kinds of interesting things. And so seeing these people putting it together is a real fun experience for folks that have a love of music theory or a love of music performance or just a sonic palette that demands to be challenged. I think, and musicians themselves, I think, really enjoy this because they pick out pieces and get inspired by different stuff. So yeah, I definitely think that's a huge piece of it.
Yeah, and I think what I would say, kind of what I was mentioning earlier, if I listened to this more, I could see it going in different directions. And I think part of it is, yes, I mean, because I kind of don't mind that. I kind of like interesting stuff and figuring, okay, they're clearly doing something here with purpose, right? It might not sound it on first listen, it probably doesn't actually. But to me, when I hear something like this, I'm thinking, okay, there's a lot going on here, but these guys meticulously put all this together. There's reasons behind it, and I do need to figure that out. So I think that there's definitely a desire to do that, at least on my end, and probably others as well. And I really like it when I feel like I get it, or when I'm like, or when it really hits me, like after 10 listens or whatever it is. You do have to, to me, it is work. It's like doing homework. It's like what, and you have to think about it. For me, I think there's definitely a place for that. There's times where I listen, and I never quite get there. And I either feel like that's either overrated or I wonder, what am I not getting? You know what I mean? Because sometimes I'll feel that way because I'm like, I hear all these other people that might like this thing and I don't fully get it yet. And I feel like I'm missing something, which I can feel like in other genres as well. But it's definitely said to be something to be said for, putting that work in and then actually getting the rewards back of liking that. And I think Genesis, we're going back to them, that's a great example of that because there was work that went into that for me. And now when I hear it, it's effortless for me to listen to it. And I get that emotional connection to that without missing a beat, and I could probably listen to that stuff almost any time. I don't have to be in the right mood necessarily. So that's an interesting question, Josh, because I definitely think that's an aspect of being, for me anyway, a listener of prog rock or like this type of complicated music, however you want to describe it.
All right.
Yeah.
John, do you feel like your dad has an emotional reaction to listening to Yes?
But it's tied to their live performances too.
Okay. For
sure. So it's when he listened to it in his life, it's the live performances, it's the repeated listens, all of that stuff. So yes, without a doubt.
He's figured it out.
I don't know if he'd be so bold as to say figure it out, but I know that he has an emotional connection to Yes because you can't have somebody as one of your 5 favorite bands. And but one of the great joys I had recently was visiting my dad and actually listening to both Fragile and Close to the Edge with him, and getting his feedback real time, which was very interesting because it's when you hear somebody, we're going to see it with Matt with Genesis here soon, but when you listen to an album with somebody that it's one of their 5 favorite, artists, or it's a seminal album for them, it's a different experience, and sometimes you can glean stuff from it that you get, and that's a cool thing. But
I'll just add this too. I think the other thing about this type of music is that, in terms of re-listenability, when you have a complicated song that you get, you get much more out of it upon repeated listens. If you have a straight ahead song that's like really catchy and you like right up front, it can wear out its welcome after a while, or maybe not even take that long. I think the song, but I also think the songs that are really well done, they might not. I mean, there's songs that I still love that I don't care how much you play them. They're a very simple song, and I'm always going to love it. But with these kind of more complicated prog rock song stuff, if that's your thing, if you're into that, it's so much more interesting, and you can spend much more time listening to it and never really get sick of it the way that you do a more simplified song.
But you have to be willing to put in that work.
Yes, you do. Yep. And it's certainly not for everybody, and there's plenty of times where I'm like, I don't want to do this. It's not like I'm always doing that. Like, I like to be cool music listener guy, but I'm not always. I'm like, I don't want to do that. No, I'm good. So, and I don't feel right now I can say that with this album. I'm probably with John, you guys, thumbs in the middle. Yeah. I don't know if I heard enough here to make me really want to delve into this the way that I might need to, because I'm not sure I'm going to come out the other end, being like, oh my God, you know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
So
I think having Yes as one of your 5 favorite bands is such like an interesting, or like, that's such like a baller move, because who is that person? You want to know who that person is.
Dude, they're out there. And
I was about to say, I don't think my dad is unique in that. Yeah. Yes has a massive following.
And if you're in that club, man, you're in a special club that are like people that, they get it, and and that's the other thing too. It's that appeal of, this is something that we know is not this hugely popular thing, like on a massive scale, right? This is it is more of a niche thing, partially because it's an older band. But when you share that with somebody else, like when I go to those Genesis recreation band, and it's like all these middle-aged, older 60-year-old dudes rocking out Genesis stuff. I mean, it's I know I don't want to say that for later, but it's also.
let's be honest, there's an outsider ethos to that type
Yeah.
of music too. Like
Yes.
sort of this is not, anybody can listen to the Stones, right? But we,
Yes.
or even like, the
Yeah.
Beatles' White Album is complicated, but it's not like this complicated.
Right.
There's a little bit of that to this type of music too. And that's why I often joke around and call it math rock, because it's both in terms of how, having to do it like a math problem, but also sort of people that like math, and like their music,
Right.
tend to overlap on this stuff too. So, yeah. So, awesome. Well, really interesting show, I think, this week. 3